The Stimson's python is a snake built for Australia's heartland.
Gorges, got to get you off the road.
Perfect habitat for snakes of the Naturalistic genus. Just amazing.
Thriving in the very places where giants once ruled.
Hey folks, still on the road. This time I'm heading deep into the southwest of New South Wales, heading into an area that George Miller famously turned into the wasteland in his Mad Max series of films. It's not a wasteland to me though. It's going to serve as inspiration for another enclosure, this time for a python. Now when we think of pythons, we often think of huge snakes, things like the reticulated python, the largest snake on earth at 10 metres or so. Might be a bit ambitious for me, so we're going to aim for something a bit smaller. In fact, one of the world's smallest pythons. I'm hoping to find out here some inspiration for an enclosure for a Stimson's python.
This doesn't feel like a wasteland at all. It feels alive, full of ideas for a special build. I'm already imagining how this might shape a truly special enclosure. But out here, the road always has its own plans. Off the road, fella. What have you been eating? Vegetation in there.
I think every one of these shinglebacks I've rescued off the road this trip has had a different colour. This one's a beautiful light pattern. Does blend in quite well. Particular spot. It's gorgeous. Got to get you off the road. Good to see another day. This animal's probably anywhere between 20 and 40 years old, so really special. Back this way, mate. Here you go. Thank you.
The Stimson's python is a snake built for Australia's heartland. It thrives in the arid zones, particularly in rocky ranges, caves and overhangs where heat lingers after the sun has dropped. Its range reaches right into the Broken Hill complex, the rugged landscape I'm exploring now. This isn't just old country, it's ancient, shaped in the Proterozoic era. To find inspiration for our enclosure, I'm heading into the gorges of the Eastern Ranges, where time and geology collide. When you visit a place as beautiful as this, it becomes really easy to see just how important a landscape like this would have been to Indigenous people. It's appropriate that we're looking for inspiration for a python build because right across Australia, a snake actually features in Indigenous stories around how the very landscape was created. I'm talking about Wanambi, the Rainbow Serpent. There's actually evidence now that Wanambi may have been far more than just a myth. Across Indigenous Australia, the rainbow serpent appears under many names. And in the 1970s, paleontologists gave one of those names, Wanambi, to a very real giant snake. These were Matsoid snakes, primitive giants that once ruled the supercontinent Gondwana. Elsewhere on the planet, they died out, but here in Australia they endured, even as the continent became more arid. It's believed that they hunted from sun traps, rocky gorges and waterholes that soaked up warmth by the day, held it through the night and drew in thirsty mammals. These were the perfect ambush sites for a 6-metre serpent. Here's where the stories of humans and serpents converge. We evolved in Africa. Our species emerged around 300,000 years ago, then spread rapidly across the globe. Humans reached Australia at least 50,000 years ago, 10,000 years before we set foot in Western Europe. This was also 10,000 years before the giant Matsoid snakes became extinct. For thousands of years, people shared this landscape with 6-metre long serpents. And those rainbow serpent creation stories? They may be humanity's longest running wildlife records. Oral histories preserving the memory of real giants that once ruled these lands. I think the story of how humans arrived here in Australia is one of the great chapters in all of the history of humanity. To think that we evolved in far off Africa, then people moved out across Asia and here into Australia before even reaching Western Europe, is just incredible. I'm going to sit here and enjoy the sunset for a while. Tomorrow we'll head down into the gorge, see if we can find inspiration for that enclosure. Heading into the gorge, it's easy to feel the weight of deep time. These valleys were once rivers and rainforests, and were home to giants like Wanambi, the rainbow serpent made real. Those giants are long gone, but the shelters they're hunted from, the overhangs, the caves, remain carved into the stone. Today, it's the tiny Stimson's python that inherits this ancient stage, thriving in the very places where giants once ruled. Well, this is a place of almost overwhelming beauty. I'm thinking for our Stimson's python enclosure, I'll create a diorama looking at these overhangs and little caves underneath. Perfect habitat for snakes of the Antaresia genus. It's actually well known that they can hang upside down in little caverns and catch bats on the wing in total darkness, just using the heat-sensitive pits around their mouths to find them. Just amazing. Alright, time for our technical roundup of the Stimson's python enclosure. This is where I want to slow things down a bit and talk about why things are the way they are. Not just what we're building, but the thinking behind it. At the end of the day, an enclosure either works with an animal's biology or it fights against it. And most problems in reptile keeping actually occur in that second category. Let's start with the structure itself. This time around, I really wanted to minimise weight as much as possible, so the enclosure uses an entirely aluminium frame. Aluminium gives you a really interesting combination of strength, rigidity and modularity without the weight penalty you get from steel or timber. That matters not just structurally, but architecturally. It allows me to build depth into the enclosure and to conceal life support systems up in the hood. One of the more visually obvious features will be the front viewing panel. So instead of using 3 separate panes to follow these bends around, there will be a single continuous sheet of polycarbonate, and instead of having vertical uprights like this, it'll be completely uninterrupted all the way around, and that really changes the way the enclosure feels in terms of the immersion. And immersion matters, not just for the viewer, but for how honestly we engage with the idea of replicating an environment rather than just housing an animal. Now, structure and materials are the easy part. The hard part is getting the biology right. The key to perfecting any enclosure is learning everything we can about a species and letting that inform the physics and microclimate the enclosure aims to achieve. It's not enough to say this species is from the desert and call it a day. Deserts are not uniform, and the animals don't experience environments as climate averages. They experience microhabitats. So the Stimson's python, just like all of the other Antaresia pythons, is a specialist of rocky country. So remember when we were out in the gorge, the habitat we explored was full of vertical faces, fractured rock, overhangs. Those are the things that have informed the structure I've built here. So these surfaces here aren't just decorative, they're actually engineered specifically for the Stimson's python. You'll notice that most of these furrows and cracks are around 10 to 20 centimetres wide, and that's deliberately designed to facilitate the animal gaining purchase inside those cracks and move around just as it would in the wild. A snake doesn't climb the way a lizard does. It flows, it wedges, presses, anchors, and advances. If the geometry doesn't support that, the animal won't use the space properly. This is where design becomes more important than material choice. I know a lot of people default to natural materials as the superior choice in captive environments, but that's only really the case if you can safely replicate the spatial physics that the animal requires in a confined environment. And that's before you even consider the weight penalty of using natural stone. So in this build, I've used craft polystyrene, and there are 3 key reasons why I've taken this route. The first of those is sculptability. Polystyrene allows precise control over geometry at a biologically relevant scale. I can design surfaces that actually work for the animal, and the aesthetic outcome ends up mirroring the way nature actually fractures and erodes stone away anyway. The second is weight. The material is extremely lightweight, which has profound advantages for enclosures intended for home use. The third thing, which is often overlooked, is insulation. So polystyrene is an excellent insulator. That means a more stable thermal environment for the animal, smoother gradients. There's also benefits for the keeper because a well-insulated enclosure simply uses less power. So the rockwork itself includes multiple elevation changes. There are basking points at different thermal intensities the animal can choose from. There's lots of furrows and cracks that will help the animal to move around and navigate all these surfaces. There's a burrow, so the animal can feel secure but can still be observed from the outside. There's a small pond where the animal can drink from. Also, pythons are known to like to completely immerse themselves, so that accommodates that. And at night, we have 2 warm rocks set to different temperatures, so the animal can choose its preferred operating temperature. So there's genuine agency, genuine choice that the animal can use to navigate through this enclosure. Which brings us to the life support systems. Once again, automation plays a big role here. The goal isn't to create a static environment, it's to create a dynamic one. That's especially important for pythons. Their natural lifestyle is already fairly sedentary, and static captive environments can compound that into chronic inactivity and obesity. Stimson's pythons are mostly nocturnal in the wild, but they're not exclusively so. They will occasionally be active during the day, particularly after feeding, and while they're associated with the desert, they're rarely exposed to the extremes of desert conditions. They use sheltered, well-shaded rocky country, often close to permanent water, and their peak activity occurs well outside of summer extremes of heat and light. So the life support strategy here has to reflect that reality. So during the day there are two 50-watt halogen lamps positioned at different distances to the basking point. So this one here is about 300 millimeters from the from the lamp, and the one over here is about 200 millimeters from the lamp. That provides the animal with agency. It can choose a basking point at slightly different temperatures depending on its needs at the time. So again, we're trying to provide agency, provide the animal with choice rather than just limiting it to one option. At night the halogens shut off, but the heat provision continues, just in a different form. Stimson's pythons are highly thigothermic. They regulate body temperature primarily through contact with warm surfaces that have absorbed heat during the day. To replicate that, two specialised warm rocks are activated automatically after sunset. I've built these rocks myself to ensure the thermal profile matches the species requirements, and I've incorporated multiple layers of redundancy to avoid the risk of overheating. These aren't crude heat sources. They're designed to operate within a narrow, safe range. So the higher rock is using a 20-watt element. It's set to operate between 35 to 38 degrees, and the lower one is using a 40-watt element. It's set to operate around the 40 to 42 degree mark. Each of those is managed by its own microcontroller. It's better to use one of those than to rely on the smart switching alone, because you can get oscillations through the quirks of the scripting in a smart switch. The smart switch still has a role to play, however, in that it is set to cut power altogether in the unlikely event that one of those microcontrollers were to fail. So if it hits 45 degrees, it's all power out. And even beyond that, there's a solid state thermal cutout that prevents temperatures exceeding 50 degrees. At that point, the redundancy isn't just about the animal, it's about fire safety. Water is provided through this little rock pool and is designed for quick manual water changes and automatic levelling. There's a gate valve that allows the system to be flushed rapidly, which keeps maintenance simple and encourages frequent water replacement. There's no dehumidifier in this build. Stimson's pythons spend much of their time in sheltered microhabitats that are protected from desiccation and are often close to water. The separate burrow provides a naturally higher humidity microclimate, which can be maintained simply by keeping the substrate slightly moistened. Now, as we know, a persistent problem with captive pythons is obesity, and this is where I wanted to experiment a bit. There's a link between snakes becoming inactive in captivity and having a static sensory environment. A snake's experience of the world is largely shaped through smell. The snake's brain has enlarged olfactory regions. The specialised Jacobson's organ interlinks with a forked tongue that constantly samples its surroundings in stereo. If we ignore smell when designing captive environments, we're not just missing a detail, we're failing to engage the animal's primary way of sensing the world. So I've designed a system to deliberately reintroduce novelty to the olfactory environment. I call it ROS, the Reptile Olfactory Stimulation System. So up in the hood here, there are 3 chambers, each with one of these tiny electric fans. Each of the fans is connected to a smart switch, which can activate at various times throughout the week. Inside each chamber, I can place a different scent source. Garden soil, crushed leaf litter, or even something as simple as a tissue with a drop of eucalyptus oil. As the week progresses, different chambers will activate, introducing new chemical information into the enclosure. The goal isn't to overwhelm the animal, it's to prompt curiosity, to trigger some exploratory behaviour, to get the snake moving, investigating, sampling its environment, and hopefully burning a few calories in the process. New materials can be rotated through the chambers regularly to keep the system genuinely novel. It's a way of injecting some of the sensory dynamism of the wild into a controlled space. So that's a technical roundup for this build. Structure, rock work, life support, even a bit of experimental biological hacking of the olfactory environment to see if we can introduce some additional enrichment. Next up, it's time to get the door on, the finishing panels. We might even introduce this enclosure to a python and get it across the line. From the beginning of this build, I had one image in my head, an uninterrupted view of the rock facade sweeping across a full 90 degrees of viewing. No uprights, no joins, just rock meeting the light. To get there, I had my supplier heat bend a single polycarbonate sheet around the aluminium door frame, and once I was happy with the fit, I bonded that into place using Sikaflex. The scenic backdrop with our view within the gorge was next. Once again, I'm running an LED strip behind it, and it continues into the ceiling of the enclosure. The strip serves double duty. It backlights the backdrop and gives me a soft nocturnal viewing light for watching the animal when it's most active after dark. The adventure into the heartland of Stimson's python habitat was honestly one of the most incredible field experiences I've had. Standing in that landscape, you start to get a feel for the scale of what these animals have adapted to, and it really starts to recalibrate your thinking. I think what we've ended up with is a home for a reptile that really speaks to its ecology, and perhaps along the way it also becomes a small tribute to the wild places that these species have evolved to survive in. To me, that's a way that we can show respect and admiration for processes that we're really only just beginning to understand. But the journey wouldn't be complete without someone to road test the enclosure. And here we have it. One of the world's smallest pythons, Antaresia stimsoni. It's just beautiful. This one's about a year old. It shares all of the fundamental architecture of the world's largest snake, the reticulated python, but here it's just scaled down. It really blows me away that essentially these guys have repurposed the homes of those ancient Matsoid snakes, those giants that lived millions of years before them in the same rocky gorges. And in honour of that, I'm going to call him Wanambi. Come on, Wanambi, time to come and check out your new home. Thanks for joining me on this adventure and build. Like all of my enclosures, this one will become a test bed. We'll come back in a future episode to check in on how the various features are performing and how Wanambi is responding to them. If you enjoyed this one, a like and subscribe genuinely help the channel, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.